I'm Madison Hale. I'm 34. And the last thing I expected on an ordinary Tuesday evening was a call from my mother that would reopen every wound I thought I'd already stitched shut. Your sister's in trouble, she said. She owes $40,000. And if you don't help, don't expect us to be there for you anymore. For most of my life, I was the fixer, the stable one, the daughter they could count on to clean up everyone else's messes. While Tessa crashed cars, dropped out of programs, and burned every bridge she walked across, I paid rent at 18, put myself through school, and built a life they never bothered to show up for. And now they weren't asking for help. They were demanding it. But this time, I didn't fold. Before I take you back to where it all began, I want to know, have you ever been the one your family always leaned on, until you had nothing left to give? Leave me a comment if you've ever felt like the backup plan. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next will make you rethink everything you've been taught about loyalty, family, and the price of peace. It was just after 6 on a Tuesday when Madison Hale's phone lit up, Mom glowing against the dark screen like a warning light she'd seen too many times before. She didn't answer right away. She never did. Because these calls were never really about checking in. They were summoned, dressed up a conversation. Outside, Portland's early evening rain painted streaks down the window of her apartment. Inside, her desk lamp cast a soft halo over lines of code still glowing on her laptop. She had a meeting in an hour. She had deadlines. She had peace. But the name on that screen had a way of cutting through all of it. She picked up on the fourth ring. Madison, sweetheart, how are you? Diane's voice was all sugar and shine, like she had just remembered she had a daughter. It always started this way. Soft, performative. Like warming up before a performance. Neither of them wanted to be in. I'm good, Madison replied, keeping it flat. You know. Same old, same old. Still doing that tech thing. That tech thing. 4 words that erased the years she spent building her career from nothing. 4 words that reduced every late night, every certification, every win, into a hobby. And yet Madison didn't flinch. She never did. Not anymore. It's going well. She could hear her mother smiling through the pause that followed. And in that quiet moment, Madison felt it. The old, familiar pull. Not love, not warmth, but weight. The kind that came with being the daughter who was always supposed to hold it all together. She leaned back in her chair, watching the screensaver ripple across her monitor, and thought, not for the first time, how strange it was that she'd ended up so stable in a family that had never once offered her a steady place to stand. She was 18 when she started paying rent. Diane had typed up an invoice, printed it, and signed it in blue ink like they were strangers entering a lease. No conversation, no warning, just a line that read, "This house isn't free." Tessa, her younger sister, was 17 at the time. She got a brand new laptop that week because her old one felt slow. No rent, no chores, no curfews, just tears and the familiar chorus of, "She's sensitive, she's creative, she just needs space." That was the refrain. Tessa was the delicate one, the one who couldn't be pushed too hard, the one who fell apart when life didn't tilt in her favor. Madison, meanwhile, was strong, which in their house meant expected to carry everyone else. She worked nights at a hardware store while attending community college. She studied on lunch breaks and saved every dollar. No one helped her move into her first apartment. No one came to her graduation. But when Tessa failed another semester or crashed another car, Madison was the first call. Always the call. That was the pattern. Not just growing up, but long after. Through jobs, moves, and relationships. Tessa stumbled. Madison steadied. Tessa broke. Madison buffered. And each time, the silence around her own needs grew louder. Now, in a quiet apartment with a steady job and a locked front door, Madison had almost convinced herself those days were behind her, that her life was her own, that she didn't belong to their chaos anymore. But as she listened to her mother's voice, syrupy and staged, she knew whatever this call was about, it wasn't nothing, and whatever was coming next, it wouldn't be the first time she was asked to pay for someone else's mess. Diane didn't ease into it. There wasn't even the usual 5-minute prelude of half-hearted small talk. Just a breath, a pause, and then, "It's about your sister." Of course it was. Madison didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch, giving Diane space to fill it with whatever version of urgency she'd rehearsed this time. Rain ticked against the window. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The cursor on her laptop blinked steadily like it, too, was waiting. "She's gotten herself into a little trouble," Diane said, voice carefully trembling. "Some unfortunate choices. And now, well, she owes some people money." Madison said nothing. She'd learned years ago that the less she responded, the more her mother would reveal. So she waited. 40,000. Diane continued, barely above a whisper. "It's serious, Maddie. The kind of serious that doesn't go away on its own." Madison looked out the window. The skyline of Portland was slowly blurring into night. She imagined Tessa somewhere not too far from here, spinning out yet again, burning through another opportunity, another lifeline. It was always the same fire, just a different room. "Who does she owe?" Madison asked calmly. "She didn't say." Diane replied quickly, too quickly. "But they're not the kind of people you ignore." She's scared. We're all scared. That last part made Madison blink. "We're all scared," she repeated silently in her head. Since when had we included her? She leaned forward, fingers gently tapping the edge of her desk. "And you're calling because—" Diane hesitated. That half-second pause, full of hesitation and calculation, told Madison everything she needed to know. "We need your help. Just this once. You've done so well for yourself. You have the means." Madison let the words hang in the air between them. She wasn't surprised, not even disappointed. Just tired. "And if I don't?" The silence on the other end was different this time. Not hesitant. Sharp. Intentional. "If you don't step up," Diane said, voice tightening, "then don't expect us to be there for you anymore." There it was, not a request, a threat. Dressed in the same maternal tone Diane used when Tessa scraped a knee or needed a ride home from the airport. Except now, it came with a knife hidden under velvet. Madison almost laughed. Not out loud, but somewhere deep in her chest, bitter and sharp. "Be there for me." Since when? She thought of birthdays spent alone in college dorms, of holidays where only a generic card arrived, signed, "Love." Mom and Dad, as if even writing her name required effort. She thought of every time she'd been told, "You're so independent," as both a compliment and an excuse. And now here was Diane, threatening to withdraw a support system that had never truly existed, trying to use love like leverage. Again, 40,000 is a lot, Madison said evenly. "I know, honey. But she's your sister." The word sister echoed strangely in her ears. A word that should have meant shared memories, late-night secrets, protective laughter. But for Madison, it had always meant messes, apologies, and unpaid debts that weren't hers. She didn't answer right away, just stared at the wall across from her desk, at a framed photo of the Oregon coast she'd taken years ago. Waves crashing into dark stone, wild and unbothered. "I'll think about it," she said finally. The relief in Diane's voice was immediate, too immediate. Oh, Madison, thank you. I knew you'd come through. She said it like a prayer already answered, like the deal was sealed the moment Madison picked up the phone. They hung up 2 minutes later, after the required pleasantries. Talk soon. Take care. Love you. All delivered with the weight of habit, not sincerity. Madison set the phone down slowly. Her hand was colder than she expected. The room felt too quiet. Her laptop still glowed on the desk, but the document she'd been editing was long forgotten. Her tea had gone cold. This wasn't the first time they'd asked. It wasn't even the fifth. But something about this call felt different. Maybe it was the size of the request. Maybe it was the threat tucked inside Diane's voice like a needle under silk. Or maybe it was the quiet realization that, after all these years, they still didn't understand. Madison wasn't the fragile one, but she wasn't theirs to manipulate anymore either. Madison didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay in bed with the lights off, the phone still on the nightstand, face down, as if hiding the screen could quiet the echo of her mother's voice. "We need your help, just this once." But it was never just once. She stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible patterns through the dark, remembering all the other times, the ones that came before this $40,000 demand. The pattern wasn't new. It was older than most people's marriages. It began long before adult life, before taxes and promotions and phone calls with ultimatums. It started when she was still a teenager, barely balancing school, work, and the unspoken job of being the family's safety net. She was 19 when she got the first middle-of-the-night call. Tessa had locked herself out of her car after a party. Madison was studying for finals. But she drove across town anyway. No. Thank you came afterward. Just silence. And the next call a few weeks later when Tessa lost her job at the smoothie place because she refused to be yelled at. Madison sent money that time. Not much. Maybe $150. Enough to cover rent, she was told. She never saw that money again. Later came the calls with more weight. The ones where Tessa's voice cracked just enough to trigger sympathy, but never enough to suggest accountability. "He broke up with me. Mads. Can you come home? I'm getting evicted. I just need help this once. They cut my hours again. And Mom and Dad said they're tapped out." And like clockwork, Madison answered, "Not always with money. Sometimes with plane tickets. Sometimes with late-night phone therapy sessions." She didn't have the energy for, sometimes with silence, just being on the line while Tessa cried about problems that never seemed to change. She didn't ask for recognition. She didn't expect it. But somewhere along the way, she had hoped for something different. Not gratitude, necessarily. Just a moment when someone in her family saw the imbalance, saw her. It never came. She tried to test it once, a few years ago. Madison decided to go quiet. 6 months. No calls, no texts, no birthday reminders, no holiday updates. Just absence. Not to punish, just to see if the thread ever pulled both ways. No one reached out. Not her mother, not her father, not Tessa. Until, of course, Tessa lost her third job in 12 months and needed help with a security deposit. Then the call came. As if the silence never happened. As if Madison had just stepped out of the room for a moment. "You're the stable one," Diane had said once, over dry turkey and boxed wine at Thanksgiving. "Tessa's always been more sensitive." Ron nodded, mouth full, adding nothing. That line, stable one, had stuck with her. Not as praise, but as pressure. A quiet assignment that came without consent. Being stable in her family didn't mean being seen. It meant being used. It meant being the one they could depend on precisely because they never bothered to ask if she was okay. She was the one who didn't break, so she was the one expected to bend. And now, they were asking again. No, They were demanding, expecting her to hand over $40,000 like she owed it to them, like her success wasn't hers to keep, like being stable was a currency they were entitled to spend. Lying there, Madison exhaled slowly. Her chest felt tight, not with grief, not even with anger, but with clarity. They hadn't just forgotten her humanity, they had never really seen it in the first place. And that made what came next feel different. Not like betrayal, not even revenge, just balance. Finally, by morning, Madison had made her decision. Not about the money, at least not yet, but about something else. She wasn't going to react the way they expected. Not this time. No panic, no rush, no automatic yes. Instead, she made tea, sat by the window, and opened the drawer she hadn't touched in years. It was the old pine cabinet tucked beside her bookshelf, the one she never got around to replacing. The bottom drawer stuck a little, swollen with time, and inside was a small folder wrapped in an elastic band, yellowed at the edges, labeled in her own handwriting, Grandpa's estate. She didn't even know why she'd kept it. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of the rare comfort it held. Her grandfather had been the only person in her family who spoke to her like she had value outside of usefulness. He wasn't a loud man. He didn't give long speeches or play favorites. But when she was 15, and everyone else brushed off her interest in tech as just a phase, he gave her a soldering kit and said, "Build something real." Inside the folder were legal papers, mostly dry and dull, disbursements, deeds, estate notes, but tucked near the back was a letter, typewritten, dated the summer before he passed. It was addressed jointly, Madison Hale and Tessa Hale. She remembered now, vaguely, how it had come up. A small education trust he'd set aside for both granddaughters, equal amounts, restricted access. It was meant to be used for tuition, training, or essential life transitions. She had used her portion for one semester at a private college before transferring to a state school on a full scholarship. The rest, she'd assumed, had stayed untouched. She pulled out her laptop. The login to the old trust account portal still worked, miraculously. She entered her credentials, reset her password, and scrolled through the account history, line by line. And then she saw it. A withdrawal. $42,000. Made years after she'd stopped using the account. Labeled emergency assistance. The recipient, not listed, just a generic institutional transfer code. But she knew. Tessa. And then her eyes caught something worse. A notation in the administrator's remarks, requested by guardian Diane Hale, approved under joint trust stipulation. Madison sat still for a long moment, as if silence might make the numbers disappear. It hadn't been a joint decision. It hadn't even been a conversation. Her mother had gone to the institution and requested funds from the trust, her portion, and had it processed as if it were a group effort. But the reality was clear: they took what wasn't theirs. Quietly, strategically, with the assumption she'd never notice. She reached for her phone and texted Camilla Tran, old law school roommate, now a corporate attorney in San Francisco. They hadn't talked in a while, but Camilla always answered when the subject line said urgent. Madison forwarded the account summary and the trust file. 5 minutes later, Camilla replied, "That withdrawal came from your share. You never signed anything. It was technically legal under the old terms, but only because the institution assumed consent. You didn't give it." Madison read it again. Then again. "So they've already taken from me," she wrote. "Yes," Camilla replied. "And they thought you'd never know." A strange calm washed over her. Not rage, not sadness. Something colder, clearer. They'd already dipped into her future once, without guilt, without discussion. And now they were circling back, hands out again, this time demanding. She sat back, eyes fixed on the screen. They didn't just want her help. They expected her silence, her ignorance. Her default is yes. But now she had the full picture, and what she did next, they wouldn't see coming. She waited 2 days. Just long enough for Diane's desperation to ripen, but not long enough for her to come up with a new plan. Madison knew the rhythm of her mother's panic. It bloomed fast and burned hot, but it was always shallow. A performance with no intermission. She let it simmer. Then, on a rainy Thursday evening, she called back. Diane answered on the second ring, breathless like she'd been staring at the phone for hours. Madison. The voice was soft, hopeful, carefully cracked, as if rehearsed in the mirror. I was starting to worry. You were right, Madison said evenly. Family helps family. The silence on the other end burst into tears. Real or not, she couldn't tell anymore. Oh, honey. Thank you. I knew. I knew you'd come through. You've always had such a good heart. I told your father just yesterday. Our Maddie always does what's right. Madison let the words fall past her like light rain on glass. She didn't flinch, didn't smile. Just sat in her apartment, staring at the folded trust documents on her desk. I'll need the details, she said. Yes, of course, Diane replied quickly. I'll send over everything. What she owes, who she owes it to, the deadlines, debt source, amount, transfer info. Madison interrupted, her voice smooth, controlled. I'll need it in writing. Diane hesitated, just for a moment. Then, with a little laugh to fill the discomfort, she said, You're so professional, just like your grandfather. Madison didn't answer. Because this wasn't about professionalism, this was about precision and control. For the first time in her life, she had both. They hung up a few minutes later. Madison said all the right things. Of course. Glad I can help. Just let me know. And Diane thanked her at least a dozen times, her voice rising with each one like the sound of someone who believed they had won. But they hadn't, because Madison wasn't giving them anything. She was taking something back. An hour later, the email came. Sloppy screenshots from some peer-to-peer lending site. A spreadsheet thrown together with barely hidden panic. No official letterhead. No signatures. Just a total $40, $193.12. And at the bottom, in Tessa's handwriting, hastily scrawled in a digital note attached to the file, was a line that said, Please hurry. You have no idea how bad this is. Madison stared at the words and felt nothing. No pity. No anger. Just resolve. She opened a new tab and logged into the trust account. The same one Diane had quietly borrowed from all those years ago. The one Tessa had already drained her half from. And then some. The balance left wasn't much, but it was enough. Camilla had confirmed everything earlier that day. You're entitled to what remains, she'd said, legally, ethically, and personally, I'd call it justice. Madison entered the transfer amount, exactly $40, $193.12. She input the account details from the email, attached a note, payment, per request. Then she clicked, submit. There was no fanfare, no triumphant music, just a confirmation screen, a transaction ID, and a line that read, transfer successful. She downloaded the receipt, saved a copy for herself, and forwarded it to Diane with a one-line message, payment completed. Let me know if anything else is needed. And with that, she closed her laptop. No speeches, no explanations, no dramatic reveals, just action, precise, legal, inevitable. They thought she was giving in. They had no idea she was finally taking control. The confirmation email had barely landed in Diane's inbox before Madison's phone began to ring. She didn't pick up right away. She just sat there, staring at the soft, white glow of the screen, sipping slowly from a cup of peppermint tea that had long gone cold. Outside, the rain had turned to mist. The city lights of Portland flickered behind the fog like distant, flickering truths. She finally answered on the fourth ring. "Oh, Madison," Diane breathed, her voice a flood of manufactured relief. "Thank you, sweetheart. You don't know what this means." Madison said nothing. "You saved your sister," Diane continued, her voice cracking at all the right places. "You saved all of us." She kept going. How proud they were, how grateful, how she always came through when it really mattered. It was like listening to a speech delivered at a graduation ceremony she never attended. She was terrified. "Maddie," Diane said, lowering her voice to a whisper. "And your father. He said to tell you. He said, that girl always knows what to do. That one. She's solid." Solid. As if that were a compliment. As if being predictable, dependable, and permanently strong was some kind of medal instead of a sentence. Madison gave the faintest sound of acknowledgement. Not a full reply, just enough to keep the performance going. The truth was, she felt nothing. Not guilt, not pride, just quiet. There was no joy in knowing they believed she'd folded, no satisfaction in hearing Diane weep with gratitude. It was all so hollow, like listening to actors read lines from a script they refused to admit they'd written. After a few more rounds of effusive thanks, they hung up. The silence in the apartment returned. Thick, but not heavy. It wasn't peace exactly, but something close, something manageable. Madison stood up, stretched her legs, and glanced at the printer humming in the corner. The receipt had already been printed, a neat white sheet with the transaction ID and timestamp. She placed it gently on top of the folder marked Grandpa's estate, then slid the drawer shut. That was it. $40,193.12. Gone. But not from her account, not from her personal savings. It came from what was already hers. From the same trust they had once quietly raided without asking. She hadn't paid them. She'd only corrected the ledger. Later that evening, a text came in from Ron. Just one sentence. "Proud of you, kid. You've always been the one with her head on straight." Madison stared at the message for a long time. She hadn't heard from her father in over a month. No call on her birthday, no check-in when she got promoted. But now, with the crisis averted, with the money transferred and the mess cleaned up, he suddenly remembered how to type. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because what they thought was a victory was really just a transaction. They believed she'd done what they expected. Stepped in, handed over, and fixed everything again. They believed the system still worked, that the roles had held. But Madison knew better. She hadn't rescued anyone. She'd reclaimed something. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the helper or the hero. She felt like the one holding the pen. 3 days passed. Quietly, almost suspiciously so. No new calls, no frantic texts, no guilt-laced emails with subject lines like, "We need to talk," or "Can we reset?" It was the kind of silence that used to unnerve Madison, made her wonder if something worse was brewing just beneath the surface. But this time, it felt different, intentional, final. She spent those days working, walking, and breathing. For the first time in years, her mind wasn't scanning for the next emotional ambush. There were no fires to put out, no crises to contain. And in that silence, she found something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Room. Room to think. Room to choose. Then, on Sunday morning, her phone rang. It wasn't Diane's usual tone, the syrupy softness reserved for persuasion. This one came sharp, clipped, a rusted hinge instead of a welcome mat. "What did you do?" Diane snapped before Madison could even say hello. Madison sat back, resting her coffee on the window ledge. Outside, the Portland clouds hung low and thick, like they too were bracing for impact. I just got a call from the bank. Diane continued, her voice rising. They said the trust account, that account, was yours. That you moved the remaining balance. That the last withdrawal was classified under your portion. Madison let the silence sit, long enough for the words to echo back at her mother, long enough for the truth to land. That's right, she said calmly. It was mine, always was. Diane's breath hitched on the other end. But I authorized the… You assumed. Madison interrupted. They allowed access under joint oversight. Not because you owned it. Because they believed you were acting for both of us. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It didn't need to. You spent it like it was a family resource. But it wasn't. It was mine. Diane went quiet. Madison could almost hear the calculations happening in real time, the unraveling of a power structure that had always leaned one way. For years, they'd operated under the assumption that Madison's stability wasn't a gift. It was a resource, something to be tapped, not respected, something permanent, passive, automatic. But now, that well had gone dry. You tricked us, Diane hissed finally, her voice hard. No, Madison replied. I did exactly what you asked. I paid the debt. I just used what was already taken from me. I corrected the mistake you made years ago. On the other end of the line, Diane said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, but because for the first time, she understood what had happened. Control was gone. The emotional strings she'd pulled for decades had snapped. There was no longer a loop to guilt Madison with, no leverage left to manipulate her into compliance. You think this makes you right? Diane whispered. No, Madison said. It just makes me done. The silence that followed wasn't the cold shoulder kind. It wasn't punishment. It was loss. The sound of a mother realizing her daughter wasn't playing along anymore. That the rules had changed. And this time, they weren't hers to write. They ended the call a minute later. No goodbye, no parting shots. Just a click, and then the hollow space where a grip used to be. Madison didn't cry. She didn't feel victorious. What she felt was stillness. Not peace. Not yet. But something close, and far more powerful. It didn't take long for the backlash to begin. By Monday morning, Madison's inbox was a storm, subject lines screaming in all caps, timestamps barely minutes apart. First came the email from Diane, the kind that dripped with moral outrage dressed up as maternal concern. You manipulated the system. You weaponized what was meant to be shared. I trusted you. I defended you. How dare you turn on your own family? Madison read it once, then filed it in a folder she titled simply, For Camilla. A few hours later, Ron chimed in. A rare event. He was never the communicator, rarely the confrontational one, but this time, he didn't hold back. You're a disgrace. Madison, I'm ashamed of what you've become. Grandpa would be too. That one made her pause, not because it hurt, but because of the irony. Her grandfather, the very man who set up the trust, who saw her when no one else did, was now being invoked as a weapon against her. They had erased his intention, siphoned his gift, and now dared to rewrite his memory to suit their outrage. She didn't respond, just forwarded it to Camilla. Then came the texts. Tessa, as expected, went straight for venom. You knew what you were doing. You set me up. You wanted me to suffer. You've ruined everything. I hope you're happy. We were counting on you. That last line made Madison laugh, quietly, bitterly. We were counting on you, as if her value had always been in how much she could be drained. She took a screenshot and sent it to Camilla with a short note, adding this to the pile. Camilla's reply came within minutes, a thumbs up emoji, followed by, "Keep it coming. This is gold." And so Madison did. Every email, every message, every passive-aggressive dig is wrapped in a layer of false sentiment. She documented it all, labeled them, organized them. She'd spent years feeling cornered, gaslit, and guilty for drawing boundaries. But now she had evidence, not to fight back, to protect herself. By Tuesday, the tone had shifted. The messages became more erratic. Diane sent one at 2:12 a.m., a rambling, disjointed monologue about betrayal and family and how hard it is to be a mother. Ron's next email was oddly formal, citing ethical violations and hinting at legal consequences. Tessa, meanwhile, left a voicemail that Madison didn't even listen to. She just saved the audio file and forwarded it straight to Camilla's encrypted drive. What struck Madison most wasn't the intensity, it was the predictability. Their anger wasn't new. It had just been waiting for an excuse, a reason to pour itself into words now that their control had collapsed. They weren't grieving the money, they were grieving the end of their hold on her. That afternoon, Madison crafted one message, just one, sent to all three of them at once. The subject line was simple: the payment. "You asked me to pay. I did. I never said it would be with my own money. We're done here." She hit send, closed the laptop, and exhaled. Not in triumph, not in relief, but in clarity. Because now, everything was finally in writing, and she was no longer alone in the room. It was a quiet Friday afternoon when Madison saw her. Through the glass walls of the conference room, just past the receptionist's desk, stood Diane, red coat buttoned to the neck, arms folded tight, jaw clenched like a steel trap. Her presence alone felt like an alarm that hadn't been triggered yet, but everyone in the office could sense it. Conversations slowed, keyboards paused mid-typing, even the intern at the front desk froze, caught between professionalism and panic. Madison didn't move at first. She just looked. It had been years since her mother had visited her workplace, if ever. Diane had never asked for a tour, never attended a company event, never once said, "I'm proud of what you're building." So her arrival now, unannounced and furious, wasn't a concern. It was a spectacle. Madison calmly gathered her things, slid her laptop into its sleeve, and walked out of the glass conference room with measured steps. She didn't rush. She didn't hide. "Diane," she said quietly. Enough for the receptionist to relax, but loud enough for the moment to begin. Diane turned. Her eyes were already gleaming with heat. "We need to talk," she hissed, the words sharp and quiet but carrying all the weight of accusation. "Now." "I'm at work," Madison replied, keeping her tone even, her stance steady. "This won't take long," Diane snapped, stepping forward. "You embarrassed this family. You humiliated me. That money wasn't yours to spend like that." Madison took a breath. She didn't look around, didn't check to see who was watching, though she knew eyes were on her. Instead, she kept her gaze on the one person who had always treated her boundaries like suggestions. "I used the funds from the account you already took from," she said. "I just used what was left." "You weaponized it," Diane said, voice rising now. "No longer careful. You manipulated the system. You made fools of us." "I followed your rules," Madison replied, calm as stone. "You said family helps family. I helped. Efficiently." Diane's hands curled at her sides. "You twisted everything. You should have known better." "No," Madison said. "You should have known I'd stop cleaning up your mess." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through glass. Diane's lips parted like she had more to say. Another monologue about loyalty, image, duty. But the words didn't come, not because she had nothing left, but because for the first time, Madison hadn't given her room to perform. At that moment, security arrived. Two polite but firm men in navy jackets. One leaned toward Madison. "Is everything okay here, Ms. Hale?" Madison nodded. "We're fine. My guest was just leaving." Diane turned to the guards as if about to protest, then stopped. Maybe it was the way Madison stood, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady, unmoved. Maybe it was the realization that whatever script Diane had written, her daughter wasn't reading from it anymore. She left without another word. As the glass doors slid closed behind her, Madison didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady, grounded. Back at her desk, her hands still trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the adrenaline that comes from finally standing between yourself and a lifelong pattern. She opened her laptop. A new email had just arrived. It was from Tessa. 4 words, no greeting, no punctuation. "I hope you're happy." Trader Madison read it once, then archived it. Then she stood, walked outside into the Portland air, and kept walking until the noise of it all fell away. For the first time, she wasn't the one being chased. She was the one drawing the line. Madison didn't go back to the office after that Friday. She worked from home the following Monday. Not out of fear, but out of necessity. Her mind needed space to settle, to recalibrate, to make peace with the fact that everything had changed, even if the world outside kept moving like nothing had happened. She spent that morning going through the digital folders she'd created. Every email, every text, every voicemail saved and labeled. What once would have been proof that she was overreacting now stood as evidence that she wasn't. Her pain had never been imagined. It had simply been undocumented. She sent it all to Camilla. By noon, her former roommate and now retained attorney had drafted the letters. They were clinical, sharp, devoid of emotion, and exactly what Madison needed. Cease and desist. One was addressed to Diane, one to Ron, and one to Tessa. Each one cited specific examples of harassment, boundary violations, and personal threats. Each one laid out the legal consequences of continued contact: no negotiations, no compromise, just a line, clear and final. Certified mail. Camilla texted, signed and tracked. They'll get them by Wednesday. Madison stared at her screen for a long time after that. Part of her expected the flood to come again, the retaliation, the gaslighting, the emotional whiplash disguised as guilt. Part of her had lived in that cycle for so long, it felt strange to imagine anything else. Peace, after all, wasn't something she'd ever been taught to expect, especially not from family. But Wednesday came, and nothing happened. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits, no vague posts on social media, no mutual relatives reaching out just to check in. It was as if the volume had been turned down on a life she didn't realize had been screaming in the background for years. On Thursday, she woke up early, instinctively reaching for her phone to brace for whatever drama had arrived overnight. Still nothing. By Friday, the silence started to feel real. By Saturday, it started to feel earned. And by Sunday, it started to feel like something else entirely. Freedom. She sat on her porch that morning with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, coffee in hand, and watched the light break across the tops of the buildings. Portland was still gray, still damp, but something inside her had shifted. For the first time in her adult life, no one was reaching into her pockets. No one was tugging on her time, her patience, her guilt. She was alone, and completely intact. It wasn't that she didn't still carry the scars. The ache of years spent being responsible for everyone but herself didn't vanish overnight. But it was the first time she'd been allowed to decide what silence meant. Not punishment, not exile, just space. Space to think, to breathe, to rebuild. She didn't text Camilla back right away that Sunday, but when she finally did, it was just one line. The quiet is louder than it ever was. Thank you. And it was true. For the first time. Silence didn't feel like abandonment, it felt like peace. It took time for the silence to settle into something she could trust. At first, it felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Madison still checked her phone each morning with the low hum of dread that had become second nature. But every day that passed without a message from Diane or a guilt-laced voicemail from Tessa was another quiet confirmation the storm had passed. She began reclaiming her time in pieces. A Saturday hike at Laurelhurst Park with a local walking group she found online. Low commitment, high reward. No one asked what she did for a living or where she grew up. Just shared trail mix and stories about their favorite trees. A woman named Claire showed her how to stretch her calves properly after the uphill climb. Another member offered to carpool next time. Madison didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. Then came trivia night at a cozy bar tucked between two bookstores in Southeast Portland. She didn't go to win. She went to listen, to laugh, to be in a space where no one knew her as the fixer. She sat beside strangers who became almost friends. They didn't ask for her resume. They didn't assume she had anything to offer. That felt new. And then there was Nina. They met at a used book event. Madison reaching for a copy of a Raymond Carver collection. Nina picking up the same. They exchanged a glance, a smile, and for the first time in what felt like years, Madison didn't feel the need to explain herself before she'd even spoken. Nina never pushed, never prodded. When Madison didn't want to talk about her family, Nina didn't fill the silence with guesses. She just nodded and moved on, asking instead what Madison thought about the film adaptation of Never Let Me Go, or whether she preferred hiking boots or trail runners. There was no expectation in Nina's presence, just a room. They started seeing each other for coffee, then dinner. Then slow Sunday mornings on opposite ends of Madison's couch, reading different books, but breathing the same air. It was the first relationship that didn't feel like performance. It felt like permission. And then, one morning, without planning it, Madison dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Hello? The voice on the other end was older than she remembered, but still warm. Hi, Madison said softly. It's me, Maddie. A pause. Then I was wondering when you'd call. Aunt Lorraine had always been the quiet one in the family, not distant, just outside the chaos. When Madison was 12, and everything at home felt like walking on glass, Aunt Lorraine was the only adult who ever looked her in the eye and asked, "Are you okay?" Not as a courtesy, as a truth-seeking question. They talked for nearly an hour. Madison didn't offer every detail, didn't need to. Lorraine never rushed her, never tried to reframe the story to soften the parts that hurt. And before they hung up, her aunt said the one thing Madison had never heard from anyone else in her bloodline. You didn't do anything wrong. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Madison didn't cry. She just sat there after the call, staring out the window as the light moved across the floor, and felt something unclench in her chest. Not grief, not regret, just release. For the first time in her life, she wasn't seeking approval. She wasn't waiting to be seen. She was finally choosing who got to see her. And for once, it felt like enough. Madison didn't make a big ritual of it. There was no dramatic music, no shaking hands, just a quiet afternoon, a cup of black tea cooling beside her laptop, and a decision she'd been circling for weeks. She opened the Photos app on her phone. There weren't that many pictures of her family to begin with. A blurry Thanksgiving from 2015, A forced smile birthday dinner where the cake had Tessa's name on it, not hers. Group shots where Madison was always just slightly out of focus, or standing off to the side like someone who'd been invited late. She scrolled through them slowly. One by one, she deleted each image. Not out of anger, not out of spite, out of clarity. None of these photos were hers. Not really. They captured people she'd spent years trying to please, trying to protect, trying to earn. But never people who saw her. All except one. A photo taken when she was 20, standing beside her grandfather in front of his rusted old garage. He had his arm draped casually over her shoulder. They were both laughing. She didn't even remember what at. But it was the only picture where her smile looked like it belonged to her. That one stayed. She saved it to a new album titled Keep. Then she powered down her phone, slid it across the table, and let the quiet return. Her life now wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud. It was steady. She lived in a modest one-bedroom near Laurelhurst. She worked remotely, coding, consulting, never missing a deadline. Her boss said she was the kind of person who never needed babysitting. She took that as a compliment, but also a quiet warning. She'd spent too many years being the one who didn't ask for help. Now, she was learning how to ask. In the evenings, she wrote in a journal. Nothing ornate, just soft pages and black ink and a promise to herself to remember. Because survival deserves memory. One night, she wrote a single line and underlined it. They wanted me to pay. I did. And now I'm free. She didn't show it to anyone. But she thought often about the people who might need to read it. The ones who've been told they're only lovable if they're useful. The ones holding up broken bridges with silence and guilt. The ones who stay because leaving feels too loud. To them, she'd say stop paying, not just in money, in time, in peace, in identity. You don't owe anyone your ruin. Let the debt go, and let yourself live. Have you ever reached the moment where being the strong one just became too heavy to carry? Tell me your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if you've ever been made to feel guilty for choosing peace over performance, make sure to subscribe. Because here, we talk about what it really means to reclaim your life and what happens when you finally stop apologizing for it.